Hi, I'm Mark Coopersmith,
I'm John Danner.
and this is episode number nine of
Number
the
nine, number nine, number
number
nine.
nine of the Other F Word podcast, based on our book of the same name, with the extra title "How Smart Leaders, Teams, and Entrepreneurs Put Failure to Work." This week we have a theme focused on data and online security, and it was prompted by some experiences I had that I'm going to share in my segment and some other large global activities this week as well. John, why don't you kick us off, if you would, with what is your failure of the week?
So I was going to focus on Facebook. There's so many targets and topics available this week out of Facebook. But the one that I think is particularly telling is something that goes back to a feature of our failure value cycle that we laid out in the book, which is this issue of how do you protect the true crown jewels of your business? Because all businesses are going to encounter threats and failure of one sort or another, whether from the outside or the inside. But in this case, I think the ultimate failure is Facebook's apparent disregard to what I've always considered to be its crown jewel, and that is trust. Trust that people have in their information held on Facebook, trust in the fundamental integrity with which Facebook manages its extraordinarily powerful position in the world. And I think the latest whistleblower disclosure of decision-making within Facebook with regard to acknowledging and minimizing its potential dangers to the public suggest a disregard and a potential vulnerability to that particular crown jewel. It is, I think, a major failure of the leadership of that organization. And that's really a part.
Question.
Yeah.
Question. So, Facebook, social network, kind of the penultimate social network. Where does trust fit? You said trust is at the top of the ladder. Is trust there? Is it connections? So the question is trust that connective tissue, or is it something else?
I think trust is the bedrock on which any social connection that's going to last depends. You don't connect to people whom you don't trust, and you don't connect with people you do trust in an environment you don't trust. And I think it's exactly that Facebook has. This is not, interestingly enough, the first instance in which Facebook has, I think, been callously disregarding what its fundamental crown jewel is.
Right.
But it reminds me of what happened to Arthur Andersen years ago during the Enron crisis, when they saw just how quickly a 100-plus-year-old firm can evaporate around the issue of client trust and public trust.
Right. All right, I buy that. I buy that. I mean, I think I buy the trust element. You trust your friends, and you should trust the environment that you use to communicate with your friends, with your family.
Yeah, and that's wholly apart from the issues of whistleblowing and protecting documents and data and that sort of thing. But I think that's something you were going to talk about more in terms of data security from the company's point of view.
Exactly. So where did Facebook blow it this week? It's kind of like, what's the episode this week that's different from last week, that's different from last month?
It reminds me of your recurring topic of Boeing. Boing, boing, boing.
So maybe Facebook gets a recurring appearance on
We'll
our
come back to
podcast
it.
too. But this week, what was it that fundamentally was the failure
For you?
for Facebook?
Oh, it was this issue of trust. The disclosure of the fact that they have betrayed the fundamental trust that the public has in how they are thinking about the consequences, the impact of their network on vulnerable people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let me segue from that. Facebook had another big trust issue this week when people trust that, especially the communication platforms among Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, people rely on those for communications, and those went down. So when you have a communication network that becomes unreliable, you lose trust in using that as well. So for a number of things that I was working on, for example, everybody said, oh my gosh, WhatsApp is down. we're going to go to plan B. And people have stuck with plan B. So it's going to be a while before things recover there. What I thought was really interesting is many people use Facebook to log into dozens of other apps, right? We all know when we sign up for an app, one of the things that pops up is log in with Facebook. Well, if you went to try and log into an app during this outage, you couldn't log in. You were denied service. So if you presume that Facebook will always be there to help you log into your apps, you were wrong. Talk about loss of trust, right?
Well
Now,
said.
all right, I mean, I've spoken to some people. They said, I'm not logging in with Facebook anymore. I'm going to log in with my email address, which is what I always do. Now, I also don't want Facebook to know every app that I have. Same with login with Google. So I try and compartmentalize those.
Well, particularly with your web surfing behavior, Mark, I think that's probably appropriate.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. So I'm gonna segue into kind of the cybersecurity piece of this. And it was brought on by an experience that I had this week when I got one of those automated phone calls that we all do that says, this is your bank calling. In this case, it happened to be Citibank. I have accounts at a number of the major banks. This was Citibank calling, called me by name and said the number that showed up on my phone was a Citibank number. And it said there was a $1,498 purchase on my account in Indonesia. If that was me, fine. If not, press 1 to talk to somebody in their fraud division. So I pressed 1, and somebody popped up in their fraud division, said, hello, Mr. Coopersmith. Yes, we noticed this charge. It seemed a little bit uncertain. There was something about it. We just wanted to make sure you had made this charge. And I said, no, I did not make a $1,500 charge in Indonesia. That's fraudulent. And they said, great, we're glad we caught you. Just if you could go to your computer and log in, we'll just confirm that. And I said, I'm going to go ahead and call you back, right? As we all know we should do. So I call them. So the guy says, you can go ahead and call the number on the back of your credit card, or I can give you a direct number to bypass the phone tree queue. I said, great. Well, he gave me the direct number, and before I called back, I Googled that number, and guess what? It was a fraudulent number. And in fact, to the point where people said they had also received $1,498 fraudulent charges in Indonesia. Well, I called back just out of curiosity, and the phone tree and the queue that I went through and all of that sounded absolutely like Citibank. Everybody picked up, the phone connection was great, people connected me through, and then they asked me to sign up again to log into my account on their distributed server, and I said, I'm not comfortable, I hung up. So I called Citibank, which we would typically do, and said, I got this call, and on the credit card side, they say, no, we see no charges, but let's give you over to the checking account side because it could be a debit charge. And then I fell into this incredibly terrible hole. The connection was bad. The person speaking on the other end didn't speak very good English, I understand, but it's an American, company, and it's an American product in the market that I'm in. And at the end, they were unable to verify any activity on my account. They got locked out of the account, and they told me the only option that I had was to go to my local branch to check it out.
When did customer service become an oxymoron?
It took
Really?
it took me half an hour on the phone with Citibank to learn nothing except that their systems sucked. They couldn't protect me against anything. And it pointed out to me that when the bad guys have better systems, better phone trees, better connections, better English, better websites than the good guys, we have really got to be concerned about that. That was my experience. So I just looked up a few of the statistics. I'm going to share just one or two with you guys that on data security that reminded me of how the bad guys are often winning. 95% of security breaches involved some sort of human interaction. So we know this, right? This was going to go through me. We have to be vigilant. 88% of organizations in the US experienced phishing attacks on them in the last year. Accenture spoke to CEOs. 7 out of 10 business leaders feel that their cybersecurity risks are increasing. I just wonder what the other 3 out of 10 are thinking. There were
They may be in Indonesia. I'm not sure.
maybe. Last one, there were 36 billion records exposed in just the first 6 months of last year. So it is just rampant, the amount of cybersecurity hacks and elements that we are exposed to. It's almost a $200 billion marketplace, which is something. So I guess my takeaway for us is what we know, which is be vigilant on these things. And from an organizational standpoint, especially to the Citibanks of the world, get your act together. You guys have got to be better than the hackers, especially when it comes to keeping me as a customer.
You know, when you were talking about those statistics, it occurred to me that the entire cybersecurity industry is essentially an industry built on failure. You know, it is, and you wonder to what extent it is actually self-imposed failure in order to potentially create that large of an industry.
Yeah.
But
Well, most of the hacks, one last statistic that I came across, something like 86 or 87% of the hacks are financially motivated. This was clearly one. They wanted access to my bank account. But 10% of the hacks are espionage, whether it's nation states or corporate espionage. And that's the other part that's pretty scary. The ability and kind of the creativity that everyone is showing on trying to get behind that cybersecurity wall.
well, we're looking forward to sharing another topic with you all in our next episode. But for now, be vigilant.
Be vigilant, right? Google those weird phone numbers or whatever before you go ahead and call them back. Until then, stay safe.
So long.